Welcome to Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm speaking with Poe the Person. Poe is a commentator covering philosophy, politics, psychology, and other topics. Today we'll discuss identity politics, religion, and the state of the culture war raging throughout the Western world. You can subscribe to the Poe the Person YouTube channel and follow her on Twitter under the same name. Poe, thank you for joining me on Red Pill Nation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to speak to you, Poe. The first thing I want to ask you about is just kind of you and your story. I know you've been making content on YouTube for about 3 years now. Tell me what kind of made you initially want to jump into the culture war and start making that type of content.
Before I had a YouTube channel, I had this idea of being on YouTube for a while before that, because YouTube is just like, you see people and they make it look so easy. The really big channels, they seem to have a lot of success, and they're just sort of likable people who just broadcast themselves, and then they're able to get a lot of a big following through seemingly not very much effort. So I always kind of thought there might be something marketable about me. And then what actually motivated me to get started was when I was watching Jordan Peterson talking about YouTube being a sort of revolution in the way that people consume entertainment. So now you don't need a studio or a producer or any budget really to just start creating stuff and putting it on the internet, and people can just watch it for free.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how it could become the sort of future of entertainment, how it's only going to grow from here really. And I kind of thought, well, if that's the case, then better to get in on the ground floor and start making really bad videos for the first couple of years, and then pick up momentum slowly, and then maybe by the time the YouTube is big, I'll be like in a good position to be making good videos. And it caught me by surprise, because the second video that I ever made was about James Damore, the engineer who got fired from Google for writing a document criticizing some of Google's diversity policies. And that video ended up blowing up far, far beyond any of my expectations. And at the moment, it stands at over 100,000 views.
Yeah.
That's been building up over 3 years. But a lot of those views were from this big surge right at the start, because there weren't that many female engineers speaking about this news topic from a female engineer's perspective. So I guess that's why it was kind of successful. And from there, it's been I've been really lucky, and I've had a few sort of minor hits from that stage. Nothing that got millions. That was still my biggest video ever, and it's one of my worst videos because I made it so early. I was, my aim was to make bad videos. I was just thinking like I'll just get experience. Just put stuff out there. It doesn't matter if anyone watches it. I'm just trying to get experience in this domain. And that took me by surprise. But from there it's just been ups and downs. Sometimes I get in and out of enjoying making videos, and you just got to take a break. But it's been pretty forgiving, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I always tell people, it's like when there's something that you want to get into, I think your mentality was a healthy one, which is let me just do it to get better at it. Let me practice. And it is nice that you got lucky early on in one of your first videos gaining you a small audience, which I find, I had some videos early on, not quite at 100,000 views, but that at least got, 10,000 views a piece. And I got a few hundred subscribers, and that sort of gives you this motivation. You go like, oh, there's a few people that are going to watch everything that I make. Because when you first start and you've just got nothing, and then you release a video and you don't get a comment, you don't get a like, you're just like, oh man, it's very demoralizing. Yeah. But the fact that you just sort of took that leap, I guess I'll say to the viewers at home real quick, we talk about on this show things that you can do to sort of take part in what's going on. And if you want to make content, just start doing it and get better at it. I think, Poe, that your mentality was a healthy one. But you mentioned your video about James Damore, and I want to ask you not actually about that specific incident. Sometimes when things come up on the show that are like several years old and then I think have kind of been done to death or been analyzed to the point where they're sort of covered. I mean, I would say anyone who wants to know about James Damore, didn't you speak to him actually, Poe?
Yeah, I interviewed him. So I'm really not that confident in I'm not a very good interviewer. I don't do it that much, but I just wanted to chat to him. I ended up just talking way too much because, he's kind of a quiet guy, and I don't like awkward pauses at all. I just fill silence whenever there is silence. So I ended up just talking way too much when really he was there to, like, you know, I was supposed to be asking him questions. But
yeah, well, and he is by reputation a quiet guy. But I just want to say, you know, for anyone that's interested in what specifically happened with James Damore, if you don't know, you know, check out Poe's interview with him. There's also an interview with Jordan Peterson. He went on Rogan. He went on Dave Rubin. So there's plenty of places to learn about the specifics of the Google diversity memo.
Yeah, to be honest, I think you should just read it. If anyone who hasn't read it already, it's really, you know, you can read about the story, but to really understand what this guy was talking about and to really appreciate the overreaction, you just have to read what he wrote and then maybe look at what some of the people were saying about him afterwards. It's a complete mismatch of, you know, what he wrote and then reaction to it. It was completely out of magnitude.
Yeah, that was actually one of the incidents I showed my girlfriend when I started dating her about 2 years ago that got her to kind of come around a little bit to the issues with wokeness. But anyway, what I was going to say was that we're not going to talk really specifically about that incident just because it's been done before, but I wanted to ask you about the ideology that underpinned it, which is feminism, because that was a case where, you know, you're a female engineer, so I'm sure you have an interesting perspective on this. The issue at hand was sort of gender balancing in the tech sector, because at least I know in the United States, and I think generally around the world, women don't make up a perfect 50% of software developers and other tech positions. This was kind of the thing that blew up in the James Damore case because people were very offended by the fact that he suggested there could be other factors, such as biological, psychological factors that make it so that there is not a perfect representation of 50-50, you know, men, women in the world, 50-50 in the tech sector. But in any case, tell me just your views on feminism more generally. I mean, this is a topic that comes up a lot because it's one of the sort of main sub-ideologies of what I call woke supremacy, which is my catch-all term for the sort of social justice cult, if you will. My thing that I always say is that social justice sounds like a nice thing, so I try to give it a bad name so people know it's a bad thing. So yeah, tell me about kind of your relationship with feminism.
I think that feminism has become the default position for our generation. I don't know, I kind of assume you and I are about the same age. So I say our generation, meaning you and me.
I'm 25.
Okay.
I look older.
Yeah, so the what do you say? The young millennials or the oldest Gen Z, depending on, you know, sort of what definition you're talking about. But for my upbringing, it's sort of just assumed that gender equality is the way to go, and feminism is just the modern name for gender equality. That's what the feminists would have you believe, is that, oh, a feminist is just someone who believes that the sexes should be equal and have equal rights. And it's crazy how many people call themselves feminists without really engaging with the arguments that much. So you might get into talking about maternity leave and, you know, these sort of disparities, the pay gap, but they're not very interested in actually looking into, you know, the difference between equality of opportunity, equality of outcome, all that sort of thing. To be honest, the feminism thing, it's really gone out of vogue, out of fashion lately, just because of the I think since the COVID-19 stuff sort of dominated the narrative, and then of course we had a lot of racial tensions, you know, going around, a lot of discussion on race, and all of that I think has pushed feminism to the side for a while. So it always feels quite quaint to be talking about feminism right now, and I haven't discussed it much on my channel because, you know, it's quite an easy thing to do, to be a woman, and especially, you know, a female engineer. It's like, oh, I'm not like other girls, I'm not a feminist. Like, it's, you know, the SJWs call it like a grift, and, you know, you can grift anything on YouTube, but I didn't want to fall into that, like, oh, I'm a woman and I debunk feminism.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't really have a problem with people who want to be feminists. But yeah, to get back to your original question about disparities, and it's looking at outcomes is really not that useful. And I think James Damore nailed it. I know we're not going to talk about him, but talking about how, you know, when you start from a position that men and women are identical in everything except genitalia and like some bodily, maybe feminists will accept that men and women are different sizes and different, maybe like different musculature. If they, I think most sensible people, admit that there are differences in physical strength. But now that we live in the modern world, there's a kind of expectation that men and women are, because we're intellectually identical, that we should be seeing identical outcomes in, in certain, in earnings, in representation in different fields. And the fact that we don't see that is something to complain about, when really I think if everybody has the opportunity to pursue what they're interested in, you'll get a much more, you'll get people who are, in economics it's called a revealed preference. So if you let someone do whatever they want and they end up becoming a stay-at-home mother, or they become a primary school teacher, that's something women do a lot, they become a nurse, not very highly paid jobs, but they'll be happier than they would be even if they have the ability to be a software engineer. Many women, if they studied that, they could be quite a successful software engineer, but they probably wouldn't enjoy that lifestyle quite as much as one that they do choose for themselves.
Yeah, there's sort of, I feel like a lot of this comes from some key tenets when it comes to critical theories, which includes women's studies, which is any place there is any kind of unequal outcome, that goes against sort of one of the prime values of these critical theories, like women's studies, Black studies, which is equity. And that also one of the rules is anytime there's an unequal outcome, it's because of discrimination. And then the add-on to that is if you question the existence of discrimination, even in the very, very logical, fact-driven, and not at all bigoted way that James Damore did, you'll immediately get labeled a bigot, because that's sort of the convenient way for people to shut down the discussion. And I wanted to mention, early on in what you were saying, you mentioned how feminism kind of went out of vogue, but that for a while there, it was kind of the popular way for a lot of people, particularly women, since it is feminism, but also men to an extent, to kind of virtue signal, to kind of have a certain political and philosophical identity. You made a video, I think, that kind of touches on this, and it was actually the video that caused me to discover your channel. It was about using your own words. And I really, really love that phraseology, because I think it touches on kind of the aspect of the mindless virtue signaling, but it expands upon it and deconstructs it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about that idea? Because I just kind of loved the way that you phrased it and the way that you described it, because I feel like it really touches on the fact that these ideologies, whether it's Black Lives Matter, feminism, or just the broader kind of woke religion, they cause people to become very robotic. They just sort of recite these slogans, and it isn't their own cognition. There is no cognition taking place. It's a very simplistic process.
Well, cognition is actually, it's very difficult to engage your brain and to take many factors into consideration and to weigh up different things and to actually do research into a subject matter. It's difficult and it's time consuming, and it's much easier to find someone you trust or someone who sounds sensible and just to take them at their word and repeat what they say. And you can do this quite innocently. And I think I can't say it much easier than, I wish I had it to hand, but George Orwell has a brilliant quote it's from an essay where he's talking about these little phrases, these political phrases that ideologues will, they use them to inspire people. Mm-hmm. And these phrases get sort of repeated, and not even something like Black Lives Matter or Workers of the World Unite, which are the phrases I used when I made that video you mentioned, but just things like standing shoulder to shoulder, these sort of expressions that we have that inspire people. And the way that you can get people to repeat things, when you start to notice it, it does become quite creepy, because you kind of get the sense that these people aren't thinking for themselves. And that in itself, like I said, it's not that unusual to not fully, not everyone can be a philosopher, and it is quite difficult to come to these conclusions yourself. So you do have to, I can't remember the expression now, sort of subcontract your thinking to some extent to intellectuals, but it just becomes very dangerous. I don't know if I can put it any better than I did in the video that you're discussing. But the point is that when you can get people to agree to something that sounds very innocent, like the men and women should be equal, since you brought up feminism.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, when you want them to do something about it, you say, okay, well, can you please, if you're a high earner in your company, okay, and you're a man, you say, okay, well, you said that you wanted men and women to be equal, so will you please agree to a pay cut so that your pay will be more equal with the women in your office? It doesn't matter what job they do or how many hours they work. We're looking for equality here, so will you please take a pay cut, and then you'll be more equal. You did say that, so you don't want to be hypocritical. So people have this. It's a very common thing, especially among agreeable people, that they want to be in. They don't want to appear hypocritical. Most people would rather be consistent with things they've said. So if it's not too much trouble, they will act in accordance with what they've said if they know that other people have seen them say it, especially because they don't want people to think that they're a hypocrite. So you have to be careful with what you say for that reason, because you can say something like, men and women are equal, and that sounds pretty good, depending on what you mean by equal. But especially if somebody has asked you to say it or demands that you say that, it can get you in trouble later. And if you do have a fear of being a hypocrite, which most people do naturally.
Yeah, it seems like it's something that preys on just some kind of inherent human flaws that we have. So for instance, there's sort of the intellectual laziness factor of, not that, and I think something you alluded to, which is true, is that it's impossible for anyone to just constantly be thinking really, really hard all the time. Like once you approach some topics, you just want to go with the prevailing narrative. You just want to say, this is good, this is bad, because that's what other people say. And I think that, the most intellectually rigorous among us, the people in the intellectual dark web and in the commentariat who think really hard about these things, are doing a great service by racking their brains constantly, even when it makes them appear heterodox and gets them in trouble. But that a lot of people aren't capable, most people, the vast majority of people are not capable of that, because there's an intellectual cowardice factor where they just don't want to break away from the herd. But there's also just a laziness. It's just hard to think hard about everything. And it's easier to just say Black Lives Matter, say, I believe in the equality of the sexes and everything that needs to engineer that for our society, because these are the things that get you in the least amount of trouble and are the easiest just on your brain and on your life. And I think there's sort of this Trojan horse factor where people don't realize that there's actually something kind of insidious about these phrases, because they're so agreeable that they're actually designed to get you into that. I don't know if it's a Kafka trap or how you would describe it, but it's sort of like this trap of some sort where it's okay. Now, like you said, now you've agreed that Black Lives Matter. And then as soon as you disagree with any of the things that we attach onto that, well, then you're saying Black lives don't matter. And so what I recommend to people is don't say Black Lives Matter, say, or at least be very, let's take it from Peterson, be precise in your speech. So what I always say is Black lives do matter, but I am not going along with the movement Black Lives Matter. Nobody has a problem with the phrase Black Lives Matter. The connotation of it simply being that the lives of all people, including ethnic minorities, matter. But the subtext of it is something that I wish people would look out for more. And I think they keep falling for this kind of Trojan horse situation. And people just, one of the things I always say is at the end of this thing, and I hope it ends at some point, we need to revamp the education system to teach them to look out for the things that led to the situation we find ourselves in. And one of those is Trojan horse ideas, where they try to trick you. We should teach children that if somebody asks you to agree to something and you can't think of a single person who would disagree with that thing, you should wonder why they're asking you to agree with it to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good heuristic to apply. It reminds me of something that I heard someone else say, although it's Dan Harmon, the writer, who I've talked about a few times on my channel, although he has a podcast, or he used to have a podcast. Anyway, he said he's actually a bit of an SJW himself, it's kind of surprising the kind of.
Did he do Rick and Morty?
Rick and Morty, yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Dan Harmon, yeah.
Yeah, he's a genius, but he's also he's a bit of a virtue signaler. He wants everyone to like him, basically. He said that you're not a hero for saying something easy. Like nothing easy will make you a hero. And that doesn't mean you have to seek out things that are difficult, but just remember that if you're saying something people will agree with, you're not being heroic. You're being, you might not be being bad either. It doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong just because other people are agreeing with you, but it's not virtuous to say something will make people applaud. And
yeah.
I think so a term that might be applicable to what you were trying to say is I'm sure you've heard of a Martin Bailey argument.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a similar sort of concept where I can never remember which is the Martin, which is the Bailey, but there's the easily defendable argument that they can always retreat to when actually they mean something larger. So that Black Lives Matter is the the tower, the easily defendable point where you feel safe, but what they actually mean when they say Black Lives Matter is defund the police and I don't know, reparations or whatever. It's just a useful kind of concept to remember, the Mott and the Bailey.
Yes, yeah, I had someone on the show who mentioned that in relation to the idea that people always talk about, they sort of intentionally obfuscate the difference between sex and gender, because it's easy to say, oh, gender is an identity, it's malleable, so this is all we're talking about. But actually, then they get to things where the only thing that is relevant is someone's sex, which I would argue pronouns are really related to your sex more than your sexual identity, but also the things that are kind of inarguable, such as which sports league you perform in, which has always kind of been about sex. It's never had anything to do with how you identify, which bathroom you go into. I mean, which changing room, which prison unit you're assigned to. They just signed a bill in California here in the US where biological males can be assigned to female prison units if they so choose. And it's a great example of just kind of that they retreat to, oh, we're not talking about biological sex. Of course, there's only two sexes, but the subtext is that there's whatever you want there to be, because gender identity is this obfuscated thing that nobody's really sure exactly what it is, but it's just kind of whatever they want it to be.
Well, that kind of comes back to what you're saying about intellectual laziness versus working hard. And by the way, I'd hate to put myself into the group of people who are like thinking really hard. I've got a full-time job and a family to take care of. Like I can't spend all day thinking really hard about sex and gender and racism and everything like that. I'm also guilty of, I try to read and listen to smart people and just follow with what sounds the most sensible and, try to critically analyze what I'm hearing, but it's still secondhand in that sense. And it gets reprocessed in my brain a little bit. But I think this difference between sex and gender and really what is the difference between men and women, it's one of those things that if you don't think about it at all, it's really obvious. You know a man from a woman, even just hearing their voice, just looking at a still photo. 99.9% of the time, you can correctly guess that person's biological sex, and you'll guess their gender correctly.
Yeah.
And yet, if you analyze every single point of like, okay, what am I looking at? Like long hair, short hair, like that's a really bad indicator, but it is one of the things that children start to notice. The youngest is like these really superficial, like, are they wearing a dress? Do they have long hair? It's probably a woman, and you can confuse children that way quite easily. But by the time they're, I don't know, 8-10 years old, children do start to be actually very accurate at telling men from women, and people who identify as men and women. But if you actually try to look into this intellectually and list the female traits and the male traits, you won't get any single trait that all women share and that all men share. And when you get to genitals, that's probably the closest you can get. But it's just one of those things that if you're a little bit clever, you can really confuse people on questions like this. Even you can get them to forget all of the common sense that they have on a subject like this, and it's quite troubling, I think, the way that somebody who's quite intelligent and who's really committed can come up with these intellectual, pretzels. They'll tie your brain in knots jumping through these hoops, and you can end up believing anything. You'll believe that 2 + 2 = 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something else George Orwell talked about. I was just reading 1984 again recently, and he exactly describes this phenomenon of an intellectual writing a 2,000-word essay explaining why you don't need to listen to your common sense and actually you're wrong. They'll make you believe anything, basically.
Yeah, what you're saying kind of reminds me of something that Douglas Murray has been talking about, including in his book Madness of Crowds, which is there's this incredible capacity for, what I call woke supremacy, to get people to, on some things, think very little and just go with this prevailing narrative. But then on other things, they start to think in a completely revolutionary way. And the sex and gender thing is the best example, because it was just 10 years ago, or certainly 15 years ago, when there really wasn't much of a public debate anywhere about how many sexes or how many genders there were. And people have this thing, it's just something that they know. So to bring it back to Douglas Murray, what he said is, and I love the way he phrases it, which is, this thing, whatever you want to call it, I call it woke supremacy, has gotten us to pretend that we know a lot about things that we actually know very little about, and it's gotten us to pretend that we know nothing about the things we know very well. And I loved the way that he phrased that, because it immediately made me think of the fact that, like, yes, just walk down the street and go, man, woman, man, woman. We know these things. We just know what a man is and what a woman is. It's pretty self-evident. It gets a little bit complicated every once in a while with intersex individuals, but even that is explainable with the existing biology and the existing science. And then on other things, we pretend to know so much more than we know. The Black Lives Matter thing is an example to me, where people pretend that they are 100% certain that there is an epidemic of police violence in the US, for instance. But in reality, just a quick skim of the existing statistics on this topic shows that that is simply not the case. It's inarguable, at least lethal violence. I think there's a little bit of evidence that non-lethal violence maybe, but lethal violence by police against Black people is very rare, especially when those Black people are unarmed in the United States. But in any case, what do you think of that Murray quote? I know that I think you're a fan of Douglas Murray, because he made a cameo in that video we were talking about. I love that way that he phrases that, because it shows how woke supremacy can do whatever it wants. It could get you to shut down your brain, or it can get you to think almost too hard.
Yeah, that's I've been watching interviews with him since that book came out, and he really just repeats the sort of main highlights of the book. But I read that a few weeks ago, and he kind of he nails it. And it's to use another expression that another YouTube commentator uses. It's like it's a laser pointer, and you can get a cat to really fixate on a laser pointer if you shine it at anything. And that is, I mean, I don't want to ascribe any particular laser pointer or whatever, but you can draw people's attention wherever you want. And I think Jonathan Haidt is very good at describing how you can use emotional arguments to make anything seem important. So you shine a laser pointer at the right place and say, this is the most important thing going on right now, and this is what you should be thinking about it. And if you, in the absence of a counter narrative to contradict that, you'll have pretty much no choice but to start caring about this thing and to agree with the first thing you heard about it. But to get back to the madness of crowds, I thought that it's probably the best point that he made in that book. I can't believe he didn't emphasize it more, and he hasn't brought it up in any of the interviews about it, which is that he hypothesizes that a lot of this sort of woke ideology, it's not intended to help anyone. It's intended to derange you. It's supposed to make you feel mad. It's supposed to make you doubt yourself, and to no longer trust your own instincts, your own capacity to believe. And you can say, okay, well, why would you do that? And I don't want to make it sound too sinister, but the idea, I think, is that if you make it's called the gaslight, right? That's a very common word used these days. Is to, if you make someone feel that they're insane, you can make them believe anything. We discussed that just now. But some of these things that we are asked to believe that contradict our own common sense that we use every single day about gender, about feminism, you can get feminists and and male and female feminists to say things about women and men and the sexes that they themselves, that contradicts their own experience, and they'll say things that are completely opposite to what they really believe, just because they've never taken these two things and compared them in their mind. It's called cognitive dissonance, right? Because you can hold two completely contradictory ideas in your brain. As long as you never hold them up together and look at them at the same time, you'll never notice that those two things are opposite and contradictory. And that's true of everyone. It's not just a woke thing. It's just you, like we said, it takes too much energy. You can't pull up every single thing that you think and compare it to every single other thing. That would take way too long.
Yeah, I love you bringing up cognitive dissonance, because that cognitive dissonance in the woke crowd has a tendency to manifest itself in very comical ways. And one of the best examples I think of is you have people who are, particularly in the United States, but it's been all around the world, I know also in the UK as well, people who've developed this anti-police sentiment in response to, the Black Lives Matter stuff. And I know I watch these videos of, they'll be in a protest and maybe somebody gets into a scuffle with a counter protester who's saying all lives matter, or maybe somebody who's trying to drive home kind of steps on the gas because they got to get home, and they bump someone around, and then they immediately go, arrest him. They're looking at the cops who are there to do riot control, and they want the cops all of a sudden to come help them. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, don't you hate the cops? Don't you think they're really bad at their jobs? Aren't you afraid they're going to shoot this guy or something? And it's just, I always point out that I don't really feel the need at this point in the culture war to break down woke supremacy ideologically, because it's so on its face ridiculous and contradictory. I kind of just talk about the strategies to fight it, because it manifests these hilarious examples of just incredibly contradictory thinking through cognitive dissonance that show that there is not a consistent ideological basis for anything related to it. And I love you bringing up that idea of cognitive dissonance, but I want to talk about sort of some of the religious aspects of this, because you talk about religion on your channel. I know, my understanding, so I'm somebody who used to be very much an anti-theist. I was kind of part of the new atheist crowd, and now I'm more just good old-fashioned atheist. Like, I've softened a lot. Jordan Peterson has kind of gotten me to the point where I'm not a Christian, I'm not religious, but I'm more of just it's not really for me, but I like it when other people do it. Whereas I used to be like, destroy Christianity, get rid of it. And I think you were an atheist for a long time, and I don't know if you still are. I watched a bit of a video about this. What's kind of your status?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question for me, especially. I mean, I was Christian as I grew up, and then I became an atheist probably around the time when a lot of people become atheists, around sort of adolescence.
Yes.
And then only just after watching Jordan Peterson for a while, and then after having a child, and you can watch my videos on just for the last year or so, where I've been a mother for the first time and sort of thinking about religion again, just for a number of reasons. And I guess I'm unsure at the moment. I really don't feel like the word atheist applies to me anymore, but I don't really people use this word agnostic, but I don't really like that either. I guess I'm looking for a label that suits me. I'm a Jordan Petersonist, you could say. I'm very much into the idea of religion again, although I don't believe in anything supernatural. But then, you could say, what do you mean by supernatural? And it's a pretty fun conversation. I guess I'm still thinking it through right now. Was there a large question there? Or?
Yeah, so I'm sort of getting to the thing that I eventually want to talk about is the fact that, and I'm going to ask you sort of like, when you were an atheist, I'm curious if you kind of took the same position that I did, which is that religious thinking needs to actually be rooted out from the world. Because where I'm kind of heading is the fact that what I want to talk about is there's an interesting thing that kind of happened for me as somebody who was very much of the new atheist ilk. I loved Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, was an anti-theist. I wanted to root out Christianity in particular from the world because I thought it had this incredibly corrosive influence. This is when I was a teenager mostly, and a little bit in college. In the past few years, I've softened thanks to Jordan Peterson, somewhat similarly to yourself. But the thing that I think is so interesting and funny about this is that for so long I was like, and when we get rid of Christianity, when we eliminate religious thinking from the world, we're going to live in a utopia, and they're going to have a hyper-rational society where we all just think through things really carefully. And then what immediately happened, and I didn't realize it for the first couple of years, around like 2015, I sort of saw the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States as like, okay, Christianity's influence is now diminished to all but nothing in the United States. because, you know, there's this national rebuke of a lot of Christian thinking, and or at least, you know, some of the political ideals. But in any case, immediately around that time, woke supremacy emerges as sort of a new religion and just replaces it. And I almost immediately went, oh, this is much worse. Like this is much, much worse than Christianity ever. I want to go back so bad. I'm like, oh, I miss arguing over whether God exists or gay marriage. I so miss when it was just that. Like, I think Christianity is way less destructive. So there's kind of, you know, it's really made me rethink my time as a new atheist, which I cut myself a little slack because I was very young. I'm only 25 now, and I've been in my current state for several years. But I'm just sort of curious from your perspective, kind of your views on that. I don't know if you were more of an anti-theist or an atheist, or where you were. Did you also kind of notice that, how sort of a new religion immediately swooped in, and how it's like, it's way worse?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a comparison I've been hearing for a few years, probably since 2016, where it felt like a lot of this came to a head and started being noticeable. But I remember what I was going to say, which is that I hope one day they write a history of the sort of the intellectual dark web. I know that's something very specific, but this sort of evolution of commentary on YouTube, where there were a lot of these sort of YouTube channels, and I don't know if you said Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and all that, but there was this accompanying subculture of YouTube videos about atheism. And you're exactly right that there's a lot of these really smart people thinking, well, you know, what if instead of, you know, being in church praising God, we could be praising, you know, scientific achievement and encouraging people to be intellectual, and wouldn't that be wonderful? And I think it is interesting to see which of those people who were making those videos and enjoying those videos back then, some of them became the SJWs. They kind of doubled down on this gay marriage, you know, Christians are oppressing us, and you know, they stopped going after Christians and started going after Republicans, who are kind of the same people almost, in America at least. And then some of those people also switched over to talking about anti-SJW stuff, because they sharpened their skills arguing against Christians and against the arguments for God, and then they took these new sort of critical thinking abilities and sort of just applied them to feminism and, you know, social justice, and it became just a whole new genre. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just think it's just fascinating the way that these things do come in fashion. And it's not like, you know, feminism has been around for a really long time, but then it's like this new, it's always new, and there's always new arguments to, and there are still the old arguments as well, which is funny. But it's, you know, things just come back, and the feminists come back in a big way, and then you get this sort of anti-feminist movement, and then there's something like Gamergate, where people like Sargon, who just like playing video games, suddenly become anti-feminist, and then he goes from anti-feminist to, you know, and now he's UKIP and everything. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just fascinating that these people, you know, we're all just sort of riding this wave of, you know, I'm interested in ideas, I'm interested in philosophy, I'm interested in critical thinking. What is it that I'm going to be arguing about? Because it's not going to be, you know, we're not arguing about Christianity anymore. Nobody's tuning in for that. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I hope someone writes a book about it one day.
No, me too. I think my dream is that ultimately what I sort of collectively refer to as the resistance, which is the intellectual dark web, the dissident right, to some extent, the establishment, conservatives in all the countries just kind of come together and are able to win this thing. But my hope is that there's a curriculum in schools and a history available to people to show them exactly what happened, and that it doesn't end up like 1984 where the history books are just rewritten. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
It's always true to some extent, right? The history is always written by the victors, and you know, just little things like I was saying recently how, you know, COVID-19, it's got 19 in the name because it started in 2019. You know, like, imagine the people in 100 years who are like, it might even be a massive historical event, but the people who talk about COVID-19, the year that they are all going to be talking about is 2019, when in fact most of the world outside of China did not experience any COVID cases until 2020. I think that's right. And so for everyone alive today, 2020 is the year of COVID. But in 100 years, that's going to mean nothing because 19 is right there in the name. And that just one tiny change, it doesn't matter. But you can see how the narrative, it's easier to understand and remember easy things. So things get simplified. And all of this complexity it's going to be forgotten. And probably, depending on who wins, we're either going to be called alt-right Nazi atheists maybe, but I was going to say racists, and I think you're just going to have to live with that. Or if we win, then everyone who spoke out against us is going to be called a Marxist, and
yeah, it's very,
and maybe it's not, but I think that's just history just gets simplified. I think that's the fact of it.
Yeah, it's all up in the air right now. And this is actually one of my questions for you is, and maybe we'll work our way back, because there was something I wanted to ask you about, kind of like the inevitability of fundamentalism. But you did allude very much to something else I want to talk about, which is just sort of a status report on the culture war. I mean, we're talking about winning and losing. Who do you think? I've actually heard a surprising amount of debate on this online, and I don't think it's a useless debate. I think it's good to appraise the position from time to time, because that establishes what the realistic goals are of any resistance movement. So who do you think is winning the culture war at the moment? If you were to try to make a declarative statement. I mean, I've heard some people say that obviously it's the woke crowd, they're taking over these institutions, but other people say they're overplaying their hands, and a lot of people are getting red-pilled, if you will, especially since the George Floyd riots throughout the US and the rest of the Western world, there in the UK as well. And an extension of that question is, sort of based on your answer to that first question of who's winning, who's losing, what are the realistic goals for any resistance movement? Should it be to actually win and halt and reverse the damage that wokeness has done? Or should it just be to brace for impact, for the inevitably destructive impact of this revolution, and sort of try to have something built under the radar that can emerge after the fact? It makes me think of like the mammals crawling out from under the rocks after the meteor hits it makes the dinosaurs extinct. Can we have our own little mammal to crawl out? But in any case, who do you think's winning or losing, and what do you think are the realistic goals?
Okay, there's a lot there to answer.
Yeah.
It really depends on the day that you ask me. It just depends on the mood. They talk about feeling black pilled, and some days I really do feel black pilled. The days that feel worse is when it comes close to me, when I occasionally log into my personal Facebook. Twitter is just all full of my followers, basically, so that's actually a really nice place. People say that Twitter is like a dumpster fire for political conversation, but for people who have their own sort of following, it's like it becomes like quite a nice bubble for just fun memes and stuff. But
yeah,
go into Facebook and you see the posts from everyone you went to school with and people you haven't seen in 10 years, and they're all posting this garbage, this really really stupid SJW stuff, just bad arguments, bad statistics, just really lazy emotionally manipulative things. And that's what makes me feel the worst, is when it's people I know, and people I know who aren't stupid, who are just going out of their way to share things that are blatantly false.
Mm-hmm.
And because they maybe it's intellectual laziness, maybe it's virtue signaling, but that really depresses me when I see that. I try not to let it get me down. But then on some days it really, just like you say, you see a normie who a prodigal son, someone who sees the light, and so you see people start to notice stuff, and it really does feel like truth is on our side. We are on the side of reality, and you can't keep ignoring reality forever. And I think that kind of comes to my next point, which is that, especially maybe it's just getting back into religion and stuff, but I've started to feel recently that talking about like tactics and optics and talking about aims, it's not. Maybe this is just defeatist, but I think the only thing we can really do is just seek, maybe try to spread the truth. But as long as you're pursuing truth, it doesn't matter what your tactics are, and trying to persuade people. And I think it's all pretty, anything that you try to do, you run the risk of just, looking like an asshole, making people think you're a Nazi or whatever. Like, you really don't know, unless you're like a professional, you really don't know what you're doing to the person you're talking to, and you very well may be making them dig in their heels. And even if you don't, it's only one person, and really I don't think there's much you can do except to just be the change you want to see in the world and be the best person you can be. And perhaps try not to lose your job if you can help it. Don't lie, but you just try to be a good person. Just be an example for people to follow. If they see that you've got a good life, and to be honest, it seems like a lot of these Marxists, people I knew who at university and secondary school who become Marxists, like they don't have very good lives. And maybe if they had better lives,
yep,
they wouldn't be so angry all the time. And so the only thing I think I'm going to be doing, and the only thing I kind of suggest that people do, is just, wish these people well. If this person is angry at the world, they might start having a better outlook. They might start, gelling with reality a bit more, trying to engage with reality. If reality was more kind to them, if they had a better life, they might stop needing, all these lies and all of this sort of hero narrative that they've built up in their mind so much. And that's, so in sense of talking about a culture war, I think the best thing you can do is just to live well and to be a good person.
Yeah, it's I'm from memory, I think it's rule number 7. What is set your house in order before you criticize the world. It's a strong Petersonism, and obviously it's an idea that, like many of Peterson's ideas, it precedes him by quite a long time, but he articulates it exceptionally well, and you articulate it very well, Poe, in that you have to look. I mean, to put it very bluntly, I see the mugshot. I don't know if you follow Andy No on Twitter, but you see the mugshots of people in Antifa, and you go, the way that Peterson put it once, he was discussing this phenomenon of looking at these mugshots of people who are just at the far end of, like, how deep can you go into this woke thing? And it's the people who are actually committing violence. It's the people who are really the worst of the worst. And you look at them and you just go, the way Peterson put it was so quaint and so innocent. He goes, they're just not well put together. There's something wrong. They're deeply troubled people. Yeah. And that's a nice way of saying that, like, yeah, these people are in a considerable amount of pain, and they've misappropriated and misdirected their anger outward, when there are, Peterson would probably say there are things they could do. There are certain things that are out of their control, but there are things that they could do and should do, which I think what you were alluding to, just to fix themselves. And whether you're in Antifa or you're in the intellectual dark web, I think that's a good piece of advice. It's funny, on this show, I always ask people to say, what are strategies that you have? And that was one of my questions for later, but now I'm going to skip that one, because you kind of already answered that, which is great. So people listening at home, that's Poe's advice to you. So one of the things I want to get back to, though, is on the question of kind of religious fundamentalism. Is it very much felt as if, Christianity started to weaken considerably in the West as an institution, and then immediately this other thing swooped in, and you had a completely new breed of even worse fundamentalism. Do you think that the sort of utopian dream of the new atheists, which is, what if we just had a hyper-rational society with no religion, do you think that was at all realistic? Like, there was ever a chance that could actually be done? Because it wasn't that long ago that a bunch of us atheists thought that it was, including me. I was like, we can have this really, everyone will be so rational, and they won't believe in any gods or anything like that. They'll just think really hard all the time, which we kind of established earlier in the interview today isn't necessarily possible. Do you think there was any validity to that, or do you think there should be more so an attitude of religion is inevitable and necessary, and we should just try to have the best prevailing religion possible?
Well, yeah, I think Jordan Peterson nailed it when he compared it. He was talking about the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, or Babel. I know it's not the Tower of Babel in the Bible. Talking about he says that this is a story about humans building something to reach God, that they're building an institution that is in some sense as big as God. They're putting themselves, humans, in the place of God. It becomes a kind of self-worship. And I think that's sort of inevitable when you take away there's a kind of humbleness that comes with religion, to defer to a higher power and to obey what you think would like you to do. There is a kind of humbleness that keeps you in check, and that doesn't mean to say that all Christians or all Muslims or people who are extremely religious, of course they can be evil. There's lots of ways to be evil, but one way is this sort of these things that happened in places where Marxism has been tried, communism, socialism, where they take down everything that existed before, thinking we can put something good in its place. Because we are humans, we are rational, we are smart, we understand what's going on, and we can just sort all of this out. Because whatever we were doing before, that was just dumb, and there was no good reason to do it. And I think it's just such a danger of removing what you don't understand because you think that you don't need it. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like the people who want to take down religion, I think, really don't understand what a religion actually is. They think it's like believing in fairies, or it's just a fairy story that someone thought was true. When I think when you analyze it in the way that John Peterson does, you can see that there's a lot going on in religion that is it's much more intellectual than people give it credit for. There's a lot going on there that you need to, if you were to replace it, you need to understand it almost perfectly. And that's the thing about these kind of mirrors my study of economics, which is when you start to analyze capitalism, you realize quite quickly that there's not capitalism and the markets and prices and supply and demand, all these things, they're not decided by CEOs and the people who own the companies and shareholders. That it's just billions of tiny decisions being made by people all over the world, all acting under self-interest, and there's just no replacement for that. And I think religion is kind of, I talked about this in a video, it's like religion is that sort of capitalism, people making decisions applied to morality, where it's a self-emerging, what's the word? It's an emergent phenomenon where no one person has designed this. It's been designed by millions of years, and it's not perfect, but it's been getting better. It always gets better, and we don't really understand it because no one person designed it and no one person could possibly understand it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, to an extent. I think, and I think that Peterson, your point about people really need to understand something before they're just going to rip it out. I mean, it's like what people are doing is like, it's kind of like they hear something's wrong with their car, and so they just start like blowing up everything in the back, like just like tearing things out, and they don't realize they've torn out the engine, and maybe the engine is Christianity. And it's like, you're just sort of, it's like, you're cutting off your hand to spite your face. It's, I don't like this thing because it's not perfect. And actually this applies to Christianity, it applies to capitalism, and it applies to more broader, more central, just Western concepts like due process. Because one of the things that we've noticed is people are dissatisfied with due process because sometimes it lets, the principle is I'd rather let 1,000 guilty men go free than condemn to death or imprisonment one innocent man. People don't like that because then 1,000 guilty men can go free. And the thing where this is brought up most is with sexual assault, is people say, believe all women, because if we don't, this is sort of the feminist take, we can let someone who's guilty of sexual assault go free. But then people don't realize the alternative, if you just tear that out because you don't like it, because that's a genuine flaw. Nobody wants somebody who is guilty of sexual assault to go free. That's a genuine flaw. It's a valid criticism. But then they say, let's just tear it all down. They don't have a valid replacement. They say, get rid of it. And then it's like, okay, now we're in a place where anyone who is innocent of a crime can be accused of it and immediately imprisoned without trial, because we have a guilty until proven innocent mentality, which is not as good as the older system that we currently have. So there is sort of this just tear it down without any thought or understanding being put into these things. And I think that Peterson does such a good job of helping secular people understand and appreciate all of these values, whether it's Christianity, capitalism, Western values more generally. Peterson has been he's been a borderline messianic figure. I mean, he's just been the guy who nailed it and sort of accidentally got thrust into the public eye, and he happened to be the right guy who could just make people like me, a staunch atheist, soften a little bit. And even if I'm not, I don't think I'm ever going to be all that religious. I just think that's, my wiring is just kind of not going to change that much. But I've changed a lot insofar that I appreciate and understand the importance of all of these values much more. And I think that can be I think that's kind of that's the crown jewel of the intellectual dark web, is the fact that people like me and Sam Harris and other people in the New Atheist movement, yourself, people have been sort of brought along on the idea that maybe we need to, come up with some new values through the intellectual dark web in terms of how we handle discourse in the internet age. But we also need to reinstantiate some values that we criticized quite a lot to our own detriment.
Yeah, I think I hope I was being clear, but I just want to make sure I've stated that it's not the people who are trying to take down religion and replace it with whatever or with nothing. It's not that they don't understand it. It's that it's ineffable. It cannot be understood by a single person. I think you can try to replace it with something, but the replacement will be, by design, it cannot be an emergent phenomenon in the way that, say Christianity or just organized religion is. So whatever replaces religion, even if it is secular, even if we do one day grow beyond the supernatural beliefs, say, and it's more of a kind of a Buddhist religion that grows in its place, it would have to grow. It would have to be, emergent rather than, top-down design. I think it's not impossible, perhaps, but I think that it would have to emerge slowly, just gaining momentum with popularity. And maybe that is kind of what is happening with what happened with Jordan Peterson. Of course, he's taken a break now for very good reasons, and we wish him well. But I think, just like you said, he came out of nowhere almost. He's just a professor, and he was uploading his lectures to YouTube. And I think it's a great example of the good ideas spread because people can recognize a good idea and they will spread it. And it's true that is also how all of these bad ideas spread, because they have a kind of truthiness to them, because they sound good. And so they get spread as well, because there is something there that people are appreciating about it. It's the virtue, the good feelings about it. Nobody wants to feel like the bad guy. We all understand virtue signaling, and it's something we've probably all participated in. But what I'm saying is that I believe, and it is almost like a religious belief, that truth does win out, and that there's this kind of universal feeling that I think it's Mark Twain said that a lie can make its way around the world before the truth can get its shoes on or its pants on, and that there is a kind of bleak reality to that. But I think in the end, just like I was saying before, that the fact that we have reality on our side it's such a, you can't understate how important that is, because reality is what we all live in every day, and you can't ignore it forever. And maybe we don't have reality on our side, and maybe we really are wrong, but whoever is right, I think, has to win. And I just hope that there's not too much bloodshed along the way.
Oh, I think that's a solid white pill to end on. I think these conversations often get quite pessimistic, but I hope you're right, and I think you very well could be right. Poe, I want to thank you for coming on, but before we sign off, is there anything you want to promote? I'm going to put a link to Poe's YouTube channel and her Twitter in the description for today's episode. But Poe, is there anything else you want to promote while you're on today?
No, I think that's it. I post my what would you say, my more thought out thoughts onto YouTube. I post videos about once a week, or I try to at least. Twitter is more where I go for my intellectual garbage, so that's just random things that are happening to me or things I'm thinking of, responding to like what's hot in that minute. It's more a bit of fun. But if you want some serious political, philosophical, like you said, psychological discussions, then YouTube's really a place for that. And I hope to see some of you there.
All right, sounds great. So everybody check out Poe's YouTube channel, Poe the Person. You can find her on Twitter under the same name. Thanks for being on today, Poe. I want to ask everyone who's listening, if you're listening on iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. Really helps the show, helps it get out to people. If you're listening on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of today's episode. And yeah, until next time, I will see you next time on Red Pill Nation.